Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack in the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. In this video, I am doing a reading vlog of a very much beloved classic. That is 100 Years of Solitude. I have heard this book described two ways. Either it is classic lovers' favorite book of all time, or it is heavily DNF'd because it is so confusing. So, this could go a lot of different ways for me. I understand the confusion really comes from complexity of the characters. I think there's a lot of them, and I think a lot of them have the same names. So when I'm going through this, I'm going to have to pay a lot of attention to subtle differences and context clues to understand who we are talking about. 100 Years of Solitude is well known for being one of the first, if not the first, magical realism book. So now that I'm getting more into fantasy and appreciating it more, I feel like I have to experience this book because I do really enjoy magical realism. So seeing like the founding father of it seems like something that I need to experience. In this reading vlog, we're going to go through the reading experience together. I'm going to talk about my annotation strategy, the characters, the world building of this magical realism, the plot, themes, tone, all sorts of different things as they come up. And I am going to use my handy dandy Spark Notes as my guide. I looked that up online, and I have to be really careful because when I was reading Great Expectations, and actually Anna Karenina, Spark Notes gave some huge spoilers, and it totally ruined like the climax of the story that I didn't know about, because a lot of these I'm going into blind, and so I was really frustrated with that. So I have to be very selective in how I use Spark Notes and come up with my strategy on it. So that'll be something I have to figure out as I go. But without further ado, let's dive into 100 Years of Solitude. Okay, so I've come up with my annotation strategy for 100 Years of Solitude. I did rely on Spark Notes to get some idea of what I wanted to annotate, but I didn't want to read too much because, as I mentioned, I have been burned before by spoilers in Spark Notes. So I'm going to keep this kind of generic, kind of similar to what I normally annotate. I want to kind of match my tabs to the cover, so I need a dark green color. This is pretty much what I have, so use this one. Dark green is going to represent the themes of the book. And I didn't want to look too much into it because I didn't want to get spoiled, but SparkNote says the themes I can expect are the subjectivity of experienced reality, the inseparability of past, present, and future, and the power of reading and language. So that is what I'm expecting here. Next, I'm going to use this pretty gold color. And I am going to use gold to indicate quotes that I love. The cover does have some pink accents, so I'm going to use my pink tabs. As I typically do for pink tab colors, I'm going to do moments I love, which are usually different than quotes. Obviously, I need some light green, so use this tab. Green is going to indicate anything to do with characters. I mentioned characters are going to be what I anticipate to be the tricky part of this book. So this will be character introductions, descriptions, anything significant related to the characters will be light green. Then, since this book is supposed to be the granddaddy of all magical realism, I am going to use this light color to indicate moments of magic. Anything magical realism or anything that I think would lend to that reputation, I am going to signify with this tab. I also have these highlighters here, so I wonder if I can pull out some that kind of coordinate with these. This isn't going to be an exact science here, but I'll see what I can do. So I think maybe, what do you think for the dark greens? This one's kind of blue, but I think that'll work. What if I do themes? This one can be characters. Moments I love can be this pink, I guess. Maybe this is the gold and this is that pale magic color. What do we think? I mean, not ideal, but I think it'll be close enough. I mean, these two are gonna look pretty similar on the paper. Actually, these two might be similar on the paper, but I don't know. It's not that serious. I'll just go with it. Okay, you guys have got to check this out because I officially have unrealistic expectations of this book. So I was on Celeb Book Recs, which is an account on Instagram, and I was scrolling through, just minding my own business, looking at all the celebrity book recs, and check this out. Pedro says that 100 Years of Solitude is one of his favorite books. So is The Master Margarita, which I have read, and wow, that is quite a book. But look at this. So he doesn't give a lot of description here, which is a bummer. I want to hear more. But he says, I also love 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I want to know why. But the summary says, the brilliant best-selling landmark novel that tells the story of the Buendia family and chronicles the irreconcilable conflict between the desire for solitude and the need for love in rich imaginative prose that has come to define an entire genre known as magical realism. See, I'm not making it up. This is known as like the magical realism book, the granddaddy of them all. I was just looking up reviews on GoodReads of 100 Years of Solitude, and there's this one by someone named Lisa that was so impactful. I'll put it up on the screen so you can read along with me. But she's saying that this is now her favorite book, and part of her review says that this novel taught me that chaos and order are two sides of the same metal called family life. It taught me that sadness and love go hand in hand, and that life is easy and complicated at the same time. It taught me that many wishes actually come true, but never in the way we expect, and most often with a catch. It taught me that sun and rain follow each other, even though we might have to wait for 4 years, 11 months, and 2 days for rain to stop falling sometimes. It taught me that there are as many recipes for love as there are lovers in the world, and that human beings are lazy and energetic, good and bad, young and old, ugly and beautiful, honest and dishonest, happy and sad, all at the same time, together and lonely. Oh my gosh, that is such a powerful review. The whole thing is amazing and hypes me up so much. This is what I'm saying that I hear so frequently, that the lovers of classic literature cite this book as their favorite. That's so powerful. I already see what people mean when they say that the characters are complex. So we have a handy dandy character map, which I love when they do in books. But look at these names. Okay, so we know this follows the Buendia family, so obviously having the same last name makes sense. But then look at this. Okay, so you have Arcadio, Arellano? I can't pronounce that, but that name is all over the place with different characters. Like, that's gonna be so tough. Jose. Arcadio. There's the Ariano name. It's just like so many repetitions of the same word used in the name. Remedios. Ugh. This is gonna be so difficult. made it to page 79 in 100 Years of Solitude, which means I'm about 20% of the way into the book. So I thought it was a great time to do a check-in on my initial thoughts. But before I dive into that, I wanted to mention that if you are a fan of classics, check out the link below. I made a playlist of all my reading vlogs, book reviews, annotation guides, movie comparisons for classic literature. So check that out below because there's some great ones in there like The Master and Margarita, Anna Karenina, War and Peace. There's some great ones in there. Oh, Great Expectations. That was a recent one I did that I loved. So please check out that playlist. Okay, back to this bad boy. So I checked out the audiobook from Libby. I decided to try immersively reading this. And I think my initial impressions are that there's no way I could solely listen to the audiobook. I really need to visually see the words in this one. And that's primarily due to the complexity with the characters, which I mentioned was a factor of this book that I was prepared for. But I really need this character map. I need to flip back and forth because we go in between these characters so frequently and their names all sound so similar. And I think the other complexity with this is in the fictional village that this is set in. We are in Colombia. In this village, nobody ages and dies. Nobody has ever died in this village. So if someone is born and you're like visualizing them as a kid, they grow up to a certain point, but then, I don't know, they're the same age as their parents. I'm having a hard time following along with like how this works. It makes it hard because at one point I think someone's a kid and the next thing you know they're like full-grown man and it's an interesting thing. So the context clues are even very tricky when trying to determine which character we're talking about. The map, the character map, is crucial. The other reason I really need to physically read this is because, wow, that magical realism is something. And it's an interesting experience because it seems very slice of life, realistic, but then like someone's flying on a magic carpet outside the window. Something really random, right? And so I have to like go back, like, did I just read that right? Is this symbolism or is it literally a flying carpet? And so I need to physically read it so I can like skim back a little bit and be sure I'm really reading what I thought I read. It's kind of hard to tell you what the plot is about this book because so far it seems more a slice of life character driven. It did really capture me in the first chapter, the first couple lines, because it says, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aurelio Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. So it starts with him facing the firing squad, but then goes back to his childhood, and so this is all a flashback, like it's all retrospective, I guess. So we're following the Buendia family and the various things that happen to them, different people that come to the village, their family squabbles. So that's mildly entertaining, I guess, and the little splashes of magic are really fun. And I think with the themes, I haven't tabbed too much for the themes. I'm curious to know why SparkNotes did not say that solitude is a theme of this. I mean, it's right in the title of the book, but it seems interesting how each character has like a different version of solitude and for a different reason. Like the father, for example, he's a little bit eccentric and he's known as like a leader in this village. Like he's very well respected. And when these gypsies come to town with like new technology or things new to him, he becomes obsessed and he goes into his workshop to work on various advancements, I guess you could say, to work on different discoveries that he's trying to achieve. And he is so laser focused, he kind of disregards everything, and like that's his version of solitude. Or like one of the sons, he grows up and he becomes like a scientist as well. He had like no interest in women. It's just interesting. It's interesting how each character has like a different version of solitude. So I'm curious why that wasn't considered a theme. I don't know. I may start tagging that because I'm just picking up on that, but it's not like I'm a genius or anything. It's in the title. 100 Years of Solitude seems like generations of how this family faces solitude. I am very grateful to be reading this alongside SparkNotes because, like I said, the magical realism element is taking me a little while to get used to because I'm just trying to understand if things are literal when these fantastical things happen. But it did it again. It spoiled me again. So there's a section in SparkNotes where it will do a summary of chapters 1 and 2, and then it will do an analysis on it. And that's where it links to like a lot of the symbolism or the themes or maybe cultural aspects or historical aspects. And I love all that. I love all that background. But it spoiled me again because it says something like, and this character, but even though character B dies later in the book, character A feels blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you say that? Why does SparkNotes assume that you've already read this book? Why even do a summary? Why do a summary then? That's not a summary, that's spoiling the rest of the book. So I'm so angry that they do that. Just summarize what was there, retrospective, and analyze it. Don't tell me about, oh, I'm so mad. I'm so mad that it did that again. But as angry as I am at SparkNotes, I'm gonna continue to use it because I really need it for this book and it's helping me translate so many things. So I'm glad that I have that. It's going okay. It is kind of as complex as I was expecting, but I'm excited to keep going and see what else happens to the Buendia family. I just had a beyond brilliant idea. Okay, so listen to this. 100 Years of Solitude was written in Mexico City. It takes place in a fictional village in Colombia. And according to the book itself, it was published in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I had the idea that it would be so fun to cook a themed meal that goes along with this book. There isn't anything in the text so far that inspires me, but I have 3 country locations that I could look at. I eat a lot of Mexican food, so I kind of want to avoid a Mexico City themed meal. I looked up some potential recipes from Colombia, and that was really difficult, looked very difficult. But Argentina is a country that I have been to, I know that I love, I'm already inspired, so I'm gonna go ahead and kick off that dinner. Even though it feels like it took me 100 years to finish 100 Years of Solitude, I did it, I read it, I annotated it, and I want to talk to you about it now. I have some thoughts on the plot, characters, themes, writing style, and my overall enjoyment of the book. So that's how I'm going to break down this book review, and I will leave chapters down below so you can skip around if you so prefer. Okay, so for the plot. This takes place in the fictional village of Macondo, which is located in Colombia. This is a very majestic village. Lots of fantastical things happened, which I mentioned before. One of the things I was looking at was the magical elements of this book, since this is the most well-known first magical realism book. So I really enjoyed seeing all those elements of magic. There isn't really a linear plot of this, but one of my favorite plot points that happened was in the village they are struck by a disease or something of insomnia, where people just no longer need to sleep. And it's interesting, I was thinking about that review that I read to you earlier from GoodReads, when the reviewer said something about everything has a cost associated to this. So at first the villagers are really happy because they can get more done, they could be more productive, they don't have to sleep anymore and they feel energetic. But the cost of that is that they lose their memories, and this gets progressively worse to where they have to label everything, and then they have to expand on the labels to define what that item is and what it's used for. Like they were hanging signs on the cows that say you have to, this is a cow, but you have to milk it and you have to milk it every day and first thing in the morning. And so it was really interesting to see that trade-off and that cost. So I think that was one of my favorite plot points that happened that had to do with the magical realism. The plot of this book really centers around the characters though. That is the Buendia family. We are following them from their birth, them living their lives, and their ultimate death. And how each of them are kind of cursed with solitude, and each one is kind of in their own different way. And so that is what I would say this book is about. So the plot, lots is happening, but it's really character focused. Since this book revolves around the characters, let's talk about them. So the Buendia family has generations and generations that we follow, and I'd say my favorite character in this is the matriarch of the whole family. It starts with her name is Ursula, and I really liked her. She had the most wisdom, which you would kind of expect with the most mature and older of the whole family. I really liked her. Most of my annotations for my favorite quotes were actually said by Ursula, so I really enjoyed her. And even when she was getting older and she was starting to go blind, I loved how she was so intuitive. She realized that everybody followed their same routine, and so she could just assume what was going on. She didn't have to visually see it, she just knew because of their routines. So I really liked her, and she had some good observations that kind of added to the themes of the book, which I will get to in a moment. My least favorite character actually does not come from the Buendia family because she married into it. Her name was Fernanda, and she was raised with a certain high expectation of herself. She was raised to think that she was a queen. Even though her family was going broke and struggling financially, she grew up with this inflated sense of self-importance. So then when she married her way into the family, she brought that pretentious attitude along with them. She tried to enforce her strict religious beliefs on them, and she kind of just sucked all the happiness out of the house when she moved in. And she is like the worst mother of any of them. So I'm not going to spoil for you what she does to her kid, but my gosh, it's pretty vicious. There was another character named Remedios the Beauty who I really enjoyed. She was very beautiful. Everyone went crazy over her. In fact, whenever she was going to leave the house, Ursula, the matriarch of the family, made her wear like a veil to cover her face because people would just lose their minds over how beautiful she was. She was so beautiful that men were actually dying over her. And she was unbothered. She didn't get it. She didn't really believe in love. She's like, you're so simple. I could never marry someone as simple as you who would hang outside my window for hours and skip a meal just to see me take a bath. Ew. So that was kind of fun. I kind of enjoyed her character and the plot that went along with her. One of the things that fascinated me the most about the characters kind of blends over to the themes. So I mentioned earlier that SparkNotes said one of the themes of this book was the relationship between the past and present. And that I can kind of see in the characters because everything kind of repeated itself. And I also mentioned that a lot of the characters have the same names. And so you can see similarities between the generations in those that carry the same names, like similar characteristics, for example, similar misfortunes. So that was really interesting, that repetition. And even Ursula calls it out later in the book that the world seems to be repeating itself, and you really see that in the misfortunes in the Buendia family. Diving into the rest of the themes, I did not see what SparkNotes meant by an importance of reading and language. I mean, there were a couple times that our characters were reading, but it didn't seem to be a real prevalent topic, so I didn't really see that one that much. Just like I didn't see too much of the perception of experienced reality or the subjectivity of experienced reality. I didn't really get that. Or maybe SparkNotes was implying the theme of memory, which is something that I picked up on. That seemed to be a common thread throughout the book. And it was interesting what things people remembered or not. So there was a massacre of like 3,000 people at one point, and the memory was just wiped out from everybody. And so that was a little bit peculiar. Some of our characters in their solitude, they really just obsessed over their memories, and it's almost like they had too many memories. And then other characters, they had no memories. They had no recollection of who the members of their family even were. It was just very interesting to see how that theme played out throughout the entirety of the book. And obviously, I mentioned this at my check-in, but solitude was a huge theme of this book. I don't know how SparkNotes didn't put that in there as one of their themes, but that is something that was very obvious throughout it. I mentioned that for the plot, most of this book is how each character, each member of the Buendia family is kind of cursed with isolation and solitude in different ways, and how that shows itself. Some are so obsessed with their work. They're just digging into it, and you see a lot of those, and especially for characters of a certain name, because I said that it kind of repeats itself, or some that are dealing with grief, and that is how they isolate themselves. So that was interesting. I kind of liked seeing the mention of solitude throughout this, and you could even say that the whole village of Macondo was isolated in their solitude for a while, because this book is kind of about the loss of innocence of that village and how they really got away from the magical and majestic, and as war came in. So I think that could be the symbolism in there as well, and the theme is like not only each character in the family, but the village as a whole, because you do notice that the magic tapers off as things continue. So for example, I showed you the line that says that in this village nobody had ever died and nobody aged over 30. Well, that definitely does not hold true throughout the entirety of the book. It would have been pretty cool if it did, but it did not. And I think that the reduction of the majestic is really parallel to the loss of the innocence in the village and in that solitude. I was reading this book alongside SparkNotes. They have a summary of each chapter, and then they have an analysis of it. And so there were some things relating to themes that I thought you might find interesting, so I wanted to share those with you. So the author Marquez is a well-known friend of Fidel Castro, a communist and revolutionary sympathizer. Macondo is a utopian portrait of what an ideally communist society might be like. He has mapped out the city so that every house has equal access to water and shade, and he tells the magistrate that in this town, we do not give orders with pieces of paper. Later on, we will see that this early utopia cannot last, which I was talking about, kind of how it loses its magic. If Garcia Marquez appears to support an idealistically communist vision of what society should be like, his strong reaction against dictatorship and oppression indicates his disapproval of the oppressive tendencies that have come to be associated with the reality of communism. What is suggested in the fable of the solitary Buendias is perhaps that human society is fundamentally polarizing and perhaps ultimately unfulfilling. Man is uncomfortable in society, and, as Arellano and then Jose Arcadio II discover, when he is alone, he may find comfort, but no great joy. Then there was this other section that is the analysis of chapters 7 through 9, and it says that the novel seems noisy and crowded at this point, filled with confusing multiplicity of voices and perspectives. But even as we are overwhelmed by these voices, the Buendias seem to be retreating further and further into solitude. Without the ability to connect emotionally with anybody, Colonel Arellano Buendia retreats into the solitude of his empty mind. Rebecca shuts herself up in her house with memories that take the place of people, and Amarantha refuses all suitors despite her strong desire not to be alone. Ursula, having no one to confide in, talks only to her insane husband, who does not understand her because he now only speaks Latin. Language functions throughout the novel as a barrier between humans, a dilemma inspired by the biblical confusion of Babel. Then it goes on to discuss the point that I was kind of disturbed by, and I showed some screenshots of what I was reading. Incest has been bubbling beneath the surface of the story all along. And I was kind of thinking that's because like these characters don't age, and so that gets kind of a little bit murky. This recurring urge, which will reappear again and again among the Buendias, is symptomatic perhaps of the family's alienation. They are isolated both in their remote town and by their solitary personalities. And it should be remembered that the act of incest is essentially a repetitive act. Relatives who copulate are essentially reproducing and doubling family relationships that already exist. History for the Buendia family repeats itself in ever-tightening spirals, drawing the Buendia family inward upon themselves. So that supports that theme of the solitude, but also how I was talking about how things seem to repeat themselves in the family. Well, if you keep reproducing amongst yourselves, I mean, it kind of makes sense. We've talked about the plot, the characters, and the themes. Now let's talk about the writing style. I'm going to rely on some notes that I picked up from SparkNotes on the writing style because I think it perfectly captures my experience. So in this one part, this is in the analysis of chapters 5 through 6. 100 Years of Solitude is a novel that, like the prophecies of one of the gypsies, contains everything, the grand and the insignificant, the absurd and the transcendent. In that sense, 100 Years of Solitude is mimetic. That is, it imitates real life. Real life, of course, includes a seemingly infinite number of voices and a wide array of emotions and qualities. 100 Years of Solitude gets its epic scope from its attempt to imitate reality, to include everything that life includes. In 100 Years of Solitude's attempt at mimesis, I think it's mimesis, 2 lies one reason for its confused timeline and tendency to jump from story to story without obvious transition. Garcia Marquez believes that modern life is entropic, chaotic, tending toward eventual dissolution. Thus, he refuses to impose a rigid structure on his novel, choosing instead to allow the novel to meander digressively, at times unraveling toward the eventual apocalypse at its close. Yes, that is it. It is so chaotic. It is so all over the place. It is so hard to follow, in addition to all these characters that have the same name. In this section analyzing chapters 18 through 20, SparkNotes says, time in 100 Years of Solitude is not a single linear progression of unique events. Instead, it is an infinite number of progressions happening simultaneously, in which no event can be considered unique because of its ties to both the past and the future, occurring at the same time somewhere else. If that statement isn't just confusing in its own, then that's a great description, because the writing style did not work for me. I'm someone who doesn't really like when there's too many POVs and too many different timelines. I think it's chaotic. And that's not the situation necessarily here, but that is how I felt. I was very disconnected from the story because I was already flipping back and forth to the character map, and now I have no idea what we're talking about, what timeline we're in. Very confusing. That leads me to my overall enjoyment of the book, or should I say, lack thereof, because I did not enjoy my read of 100 Years of Solitude, particularly because of the writing style. I think if I break it down, there wasn't really a plot. It was mostly the characters, so very character-driven story. So you would think, okay, character-driven reader might appreciate it. I loved the themes of the solitude, the repetition across the generations, really liked that. The memories in the theme and how that played a part. my issues kind of start with a lack of plot, but really the writing style is what pushes this into the dislike category for me, because it was just too chaotic. And I'd love to say that I can see why people appreciate it, but I think it's lost on me. And therefore, I feel kind of stupid. I feel kind of dumb. This book is so beloved. You saw that powerful review from GoodReads. Pedro Pascal says this is one of his favorite books. So many folks that love classic literature cite this as their favorite novel, and I don't get it. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below, though. If you get it, is there anything you can explain to me or tell me about this that link it? I really tried. I read it slowly and used the character map. I had Spark Notes next to me to help translate and help me pick up on things that I missed, but I'm still missing what's so magnificent about this book. And I think the fact that the magic kind of tapers off also disappointed me, because if this is supposed to be the biggest inspiration for that subgenre of magical realism, I'm kind of confused, because it was kind of random. It was kind of random and didn't make sense. Maybe it's supposed to be chaotic. I don't know. But I'd love to hear from you how you feel about it. Cheer me up a little bit in the comments down below. But thank you so much for hanging out with me in this reading vlog where I read the book and annotated it, talked to you guys about it. I will see you in the next video.